Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's almost afternoon, so we are standing in front of the Michigan Sugar Circus Nursery, and this is where we screen varieties, whether they are fully approved, limit approved, special approved, or new entries for Cercospora tolerance. And we use these trials. We have more than one location, but we use these trials and multiple years of data to give us our ratings for that you find with our varieties. So in the fall and the winter, we come up with a rating for each variety, a score, and it's based off of these nursery trials. So we'll get more into some of the trial and stuff here in a little bit, but first I want to talk to you a little bit about leaf spot. I get a lot of questions right now. Probably the most common question I get is, hey, how is leaf spot control throughout the Michigan growing area? And in general, I would say leaf spot control is very good. We can find spots occasionally, but it's not bad. There's more disease this year than there was a year ago at this time. So last year, if you remember, we had very little leaf spot at all. It was there was basically no economic impact from leaf spot last year. We didn't have any fields burned down. Disease control was really good. This year we're still in a good spot, but it's not as good as last year at this point. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is so we use a beet cast and it tracks DSVs. So how many DSVs is the higher the number, the higher the risk for leaf spot. So every day gets assigned a number from 0 to 4 based on weather stations throughout the growing area. And what we saw this year and this summer, there was multiple times where we accumulated 3 to 4 DSVs for several days in a row. And however that happens, we get really concerned about leaf spot infection. And a lot of times those are, not always, but often they coincide with a rain event, which prevents us from getting into the field and spraying. You know, we need to make fungicide applications timely. We get accumulation of DSVs, a rapid accumulation in over several days, and then we can't get in the field, and we get really concerned if we're going to have good control. Fortunately, this year our control is still good, but that is why we're seeing some more spots this year than other years. Lately, for the last 7 to 10 days, you know, we've seen that as we've hit in some drier weather. We're still quite warm, but we've hit in some drier weather, not as much leaf wetness. The DSVs have come down. Instead of seeing 3 to 4s, most days we're seeing 2 to 3. So we're still at a risk for disease development, still at a pretty high risk, less than what we were, so we need to continue spraying, keeping on our application intervals. The next question I get quite often is there a difference across the growing area throughout Michigan? You know, are you seeing more leaf spot in one area or another? And the answer to that is yes and no. I don't think it's a geographic thing, but geographically we probably do see a little more leaf spot in some areas, and it's more due to varieties getting planted. So if you look at our nematode tolerant varieties, our nematode tolerant varieties are generally more susceptible to leaf spot. They're not as tolerant. So we're relying more on fungicide applications. So it seems like in those areas, growing areas that have to have nematode tolerance, we do maybe see a little more leaf spot there than other areas. But still, disease control is good. The other question we get asked a lot is how, last week we started early delivery and early harvest at 3 of our factory locations. Croswell is going to start this week, and so we get asked a lot, hey, how do I know when to stop spraying my early delivery beets? Do I need to spray again based on when I'm going to harvest? So that gets to be a little bit of a complicated question. When harvest is starting, we don't know exactly how factories are going to perform, what their tonnage usage is going to be. We don't know exactly what yields are going to be, so we don't know how many acres that we're going to go through, so we don't know where you're going to necessarily fall in the harvest. But we can give these general recommendations. So if you look at our leaf spot tolerant variety, so you take a highly tolerant variety like a Beta 1703, which is right here. So that has good tolerance to one of our better tolerant varieties to leaf spot. If that variety, if you have a field that's variety, if it's within 3 weeks of harvest, so you think you're going to harvest it sometime within the next 3 weeks, you scout your field and you see very little or no spots. So you walk the field, you can maybe find a spot here or there or none. I think you're okay to no longer make any fungicide applications if you're going to harvest within 3 weeks. If you look at a more susceptible variety, right here we have 2 nematode varieties that are highly susceptible to leaf spot. Those, if you're 2 to 3 weeks from harvest, you're going to need to continue to make another fungicide application. And in general, I would say you want to do a tank mix, 2 products to give you some good control. Just watch your pre-harvest intervals. EBDC is 14 days, and some of our triazoles are from 7 to 21. So just try to pick a product that's not your tank mix, that doesn't have too long of a pre-harvest interval. The other thing you can do is apply a copper. So if you have a susceptible variety and you're within 14 days of harvest or so and you're questioning if you should spray or not, copper is a really good product to apply. It gives you about 10 days of control. It has a 0-day pre-harvest interval. So it provides leaf spot protection but leaves you open to harvest, so you don't have to worry about, so have less risk of having economic impact. So the next question we're going to have to start looking towards is how many more applications, fungicide applications, is it going to take to get through the growing season to control leaf spot? So that's another little bit of a complicated answer. So I would say in general, all varieties, regardless of leaf spot tolerance, need to have fungicide protection through September, the middle of September. So if you were to apply if you're scheduled to apply a fungicide next week, generally we're tank mixing. That gives us a 14-day reapplication interval. That'll take us to mid-September. So the question is, we hit mid-September, do we need to spray again? So once again, if you're looking at a tolerant variety or a highly tolerant variety like a CR Plus variety. So last year we had the CR Plus varieties entered into the commercial market, and those have a better genetic tolerance than everything we've ever had. Our recommendation for those were to spray July 1st, August 1st, and September 1st. And our more traditional varieties, we recommend to spray every 14 days. So basically we're spraying every other time. So regardless of genetic tolerance, you want to make sure you're protected through at least mid-September. Mid-September rolls around and it's time to make your next application, then I think we can start scouting fields and looking at genetic tolerance and decide what to do. CR Plus varieties, if they have very little no spots, you're fine for the rest of the growing season. Tolerant varieties like Beta 1703, if those have very few spots to no spots, you're going to be okay for the rest of the growing season. I think you can stop spraying leaf spot at that point. Your more moderately tolerant varieties, so here we have Beta 1606 down here. That's a moderately tolerant nematode variety. That one, you will want to make another application in mid-September. A EBDC or a copper alone may be good enough. That's going to give you about 10 days. That's probably going to be good enough for the remainder of the season. But you'll want to rescout that field later in September. And then you got susceptible varieties. Those you'll want to spray no matter what in mid-September with a tank mix. So two products, whether it's a triazole plus EBDC or tin plus EBDC or copper plus EBDC, you're going to need to spray those with a tank mix in mid-September to have protection through the end of the month. So your susceptible varieties have to have protection through all of September. And it's actually possible, depending on what kind of weather conditions and the disease environment we have had years where we've had to spray susceptible varieties into October, make another application in the beginning of October. So how long and how many times is depending on weather and disease conditions, but at least through the mid-September on some varieties and through the end of September on others. So this is our Circus Nursery, which I mentioned to you before. It's inoculated, irrigated to try to promote disease development. There has been no fungicides applied, so any difference you see here is strictly genetic tolerance to leaf spot. If you look throughout here, you'll see some green strips. There, here's one there, and throughout. Those are the new CR Plus varieties that were just commercially released. That has given us the best genetic tolerance we've had to leaf spot in a long time. They're holding pretty good. They're getting to the point now where we would say there's starting to be some economic impact from leaf spot. So we're seeing some spots not getting burned down, and you wouldn't be able to see this from the road, but we've reached a point where we hit economic impact, and that's why we continue to say to spray those varieties 3 times through the growing season. Those recommendations may change as we get farther along next year and the years as we learn more about them, but our recommendation on those varieties has been July 1st, August 1st, and September 1st, and that's the reason, because we still do get some leaf spot, although it's much better. Here we have Beta 1703, so this is one of our better Circasper varieties, and you can see it's not doing as good as the CR Plus varieties, but better than Beta 1606, which is a moderately tolerant variety. So you can see that difference in genetic tolerance. And then we get down here to the susceptible varieties, and these are almost completely burned down. These are to the point where we would say, hey, we're getting complete burn down, and we're starting to get regrowth. There's new leaves coming out of the middle. There's no saving anything here. And the thing about this is, once you reach this point, you're pretty much locked in on your sugar content for the year. You know, it's really, the chance of that beet ever gaining any more sugar for the year, whatever its percent is going to stay here or maybe even go down. It could go up some, means it burned down early, but you're pretty much locked in on sugar content. So does anybody have any questions on leaf spot?
What would the sugar content be of something that's completely burnt down to something that's been protected?
So the question is, what would be the sugar content of something that's completely burned down to something that's protected? So assuming that there are 2 varieties that have similar sugar content genetically, because there's a difference in sugar content between varieties. Right now, I would say that if you have a variety that's completely burnt down and this variety, today it's probably not going to be a lot different. That one's going to be different, a little better. But what's going to happen as time goes on, this one will continue to accumulate sugar. If we look at our data from the last couple of years, we continue to accumulate a lot of sugar from mid-September on. You know, last year we went from 16% sugar in mid-September all the way up to 19% sugar during the permanent pile. So these will continue to gain sugar where we have good leaf spot control. These are going to be stuck at whatever they were when this happened.
Yeah, and that's kind of a good segue into some discussion that that I was going to have with you here too. So when you think about sugar, right now we're on average about 200 RWST as a company. We're seeing a pretty good range. Some sugars as high as 16, you know, some in the 13. So that's actually a real good sugar content for this time of year. So when you kind of look at our past, you know, especially when we've had a lot of leaf spot, we've had trouble getting those higher sugars, but it also affects your tonnage as well. And so you start looking at, what the potential of that crop is to grow, that can really change. So, you know, looking at this year in general, we think it's hard to predict what sugar content will be and even what yield will be. You know, we're asked as a staff, okay, what's this going to be and when do we start and when do we finish? We try to get that as close as we can, but as Kurt mentioned, I mean, the environment has a big deal in what the effect is going to be on the crop at the end of the day. So you really want to manage as many things as you can manage, and a lot of it is about risk. So, you know, I think what's interesting and, you know, really excited about the research that Kurt's team's doing in terms of trying to help us to get to that 3,300, because you got this early delivery management that we're worried about, as well as, you know, maximizing our yield on the other end. And so it's really, how do you want to hedge your risk, right? I mean, you got economic risk, you have yield risk, and you want to optimize that on your farm, right? So you want to make sure that you're getting the most ROI on this crop that you can. And that's really what sugar beet profitability is about. It's about the ROI on your farm and sugar beets and being profitable. We have to maximize that every step of the way. So I know Mackie, for example, she's been out taking a lot of tissue samples and trying to look at, okay, what's going on in that crop, you know, currently, and how do we manage that? So, you know, maybe we do some foliar applications to try to manage some micros. You know, the same with nitrogen. If you're in an early delivery situation, it'd be nice to look at the research over time. You know, right now we'd say, yeah, you might want to be a little light on nitrogen and maybe put some of those slow release foliar products on there and foliar feed to try to get you through the season, right? That's shown in the past to optimize tonnage and keep your sugars from plummeting too low. I can remember a few years back, a lot of growers would say, oh, my beets are looking yellow right now. I should just stream some 28% on, I'm low on sugar. Well, we started taking tissue testing, finding out, well, oh, you're manganese deficient, boron deficient, potassium deficient. If you stream on nitrogen in a situation like that, you will tank your sugars immediately, because they cannot utilize that nitrogen to the effect that they need to grow. So those are all things that are important, you know, as looking at the health of this crop and where it's going. So I'm going to I got some of our top field consultants in the audience here today, and I'd like them to comment, because I've kind of talked about in general what's going on with the beets, but I'd like each of you to comment on what you're seeing in your crop area for maybe sugars and some yields. Jeff, do you want to start? Jeff Elston?
I'm up in the Sebring area, basically all the way from Caseville to Unionville area to Gagetown, so the western thumb area. What we're seeing right now at this moment.
Well, you can talk about whatever you want though, Jeff, it's okay.
Oh, thanks. Right now we're averaging 22 to 28 ton of the acre up in that area. For August time period, that's more than above average, okay? And the sugars that my average year for last week was 15.5 with sugar, which is also above average for some of the rainfall we've had. It hasn't, we think it's been hot and dry the last 2 weeks, but it hasn't been basically for the whole summer. It wasn't hot and dry. Like some other years, we don't get any rain until August. We have this inflated sugar, and then we get the rains and the sugar comes down because all the nitrogen, like you said, needs to be feed.
David, would you like to make some comments?
Hi, I'm David Ganton. My territory starts right over here at Reese Road, which is just a mile away, and goes to I-75, Munger, Reese, Frankenmuth. My comment on this crop is it's impressive. It has been one of the more impressive crops that I have seen in my 30 plus years. It has been growing since we planted it. We did have a little hiccup because if you remember way back in April, we got really cold temperatures and it froze out some of the early planted stuff, but they've recovered or they've been replanted. And we have just had somewhat of an ideal growing season, as in all crops. But for the most part, I don't have many poor fields. I have a whole lot of good fields. And like Jeff, I run the early delivery lottery for Bay City, and we've been harvesting from 17 to 30, but for the most part it's 23, 24 ton right now, which is probably 7 ton above board, and our sugar numbers are good as well. So once we get our factory churning out beets, we're going to keep going through the lottery, and it's going good so far.
Mackie, would you like to make a few comments?
Sure. I'm in the West District. I've got part of Bay City, Hope, and then Augrey as well. Things over there are looking pretty good. Yields, I guess I would say similar to David Gannon, you know, right in that low 20s there. And sugars are looking pretty good too. We've seen some as high as 16. So overall, things are looking well.
Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. I think when you look at, you know, what the crop potential is, we're seeing some higher sugars. That gives me some hope that we'll get there. I've seen, you know, again, when you look at the trends from early, and like Jeff mentioned, sometimes we see our highest sugars and they don't gain as much now. But like Dennis talked about, it's really about hopefully, you know, managing leaf spot. You know, we've seen good rain early, or early it was dry. Then we had some good rains to mobilize nutrition and get some of that moving through. So, you know, we've gained in yield. And so hopefully we're not at a point where, you know, when we get some more rain here, that it'll cause a big dip in sugar. So that, hopefully that'll help keep building. Last year was a phenomenal sugar gain, as Dennis mentioned. That was a great year. I'd love to copy that year again this year from a sugar standpoint. That's a real good position to be in. So yeah, we're excited about the crop that way, and some of the potential that we have.